be impossible in a one-room schoolhouse. I understand that. They can do something else. They don't have to do that.
You can see more of this markup of education legislation on C-SPAN 2 tonight at 10 Eastern or anytime at cspan.org. The House is coming in now to debate 5 land and water bills.
Chairman, I have deep affection for you.
The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Sir, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on June 11, 2013 at 3:44 p.m. that the Senate passed Senate 954, Appointment, Senate National Security Working Group. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote of the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 251.
The Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 54, H.R. 251, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to convey certain federal features of the electric distribution system to the South Utah Valley Electric Service District and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 251, sponsored by our colleague from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, transfers the federal title of an electricity distribution system to a local entity that already operates and maintains the system. This transfer resolves ownership uncertainty due to a federal paperwork error, gives a local electricity provider equity to leverage capital investment, and reduces federal liability and cost. Congress has passed over 24 similar transfers, including one in my district, the Yakima-Tieton transfer, under both Republican and Democrat majorities. The House passed this identical transfer bill by voice vote in the last Congress due to its non-controversial and common-sense nature. So I urge my colleagues to support its adoption once again, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 251, as indicated by the Chairman, seeks to transfer title to the South Utah Valley Electric Distribution System from the Bureau of Reclamation to the South Utah Valley Electric Service District. Current reclamation law requires that title to reclamation projects, lands, and facilities remain with the United States until specifically authorized by Congress. Similar legislation passed the House on suspension last Congress, and we have no objection to H.R. 251, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 3 minutes to the sponsor of this legislation, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Without objection.
Thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member here for their consideration. This is a good common sense bill. It passed out of the Congress last time, and I appreciate the bipartisan nature, particularly the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, for his positive words in the passage of this piece of legislation. H.R. 251, the South Utah Valley Electric Conveyance Act, transfers title on certain portions of the electric distribution system operated by the South Utah Valley Electric Service District, SESD, from the Bureau of Reclamation to SESD. Local users repaid all applicable construction costs to the federal government decades ago. This bill, H.R. 251, is needed because in order to become more efficient and more effective, ownership needs to be transferred. The system is part of the larger Strawberry Valley project, which began in 1906. This title transfer benefits the federal taxpayers and the local communities that use the system. The transfer of title will divest the Bureau of Reclamation of federal liability while providing SESD greater autonomy and flexibility to manage facilities in a manner that best meets its needs. H.R. 251 is consistent with existing federal policy, and since 1996, as the chairman mentioned, there have been roughly 27 Bureau of Reclamation projects to local entities that have gone through this transfer type of process. An identical bill, H.R. 461, passed in the House in the 112th Congress. Congress, by voice vote, passed this September 23rd of 2011. I urge my colleagues to vote yes. I appreciate again, the good work on both sides of the aisle to help pass this, and I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Gentleman yields his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests. If the gentleman from Arizona is prepared to yield back, I'm prepared to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
I yield back my time and urge adoption of the legislation.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 251? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is...
Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman requested the yeas and nays. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 993.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 41, H.R. 993, a bill to provide for the conveyance of certain parcels of National Forest System land to the city of Fruit Heights, Utah.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalba, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 993, introduced by our distinguished subcommittee chairman, Mr. Bishop of Utah, would authorize the Secretary of Agriculture to convey approximately 100 acres of National Forest System land to the city of Fruit Heights in Utah. Fruit Heights is completely surrounded by federal land and is in desperate need of a place to develop a cemetery. This legislation would convey a small parcel of federal land for that important public service. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 993 would transfer 100 acres of Forest Service land to Fruit Heights, Utah, at no cost to the city for the use as a cemetery. The parcel of land in question was purchased by the federal government in 2002 for over $3 million from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It is obviously not ideal for federal taxpayers to give away land that was purchased with federal money just 11 years ago. However, the bill makes clear that should the land ever be used for anything other than a public purpose, the parcel will come back to the federal ownership. We do not object to 993, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields the balance of time. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the author of this legislation, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Fruit Heights, Utah is a city of around 5,000 people. In the center of Davis County, to the east are the mountains, which are owned by the Forest Service. Surrounding it to the south, the city of Farmington, which has a landlocked cemetery and only allows Farmington residents to be buried there. On the west and the north is Kaysville and Layton, which has a cemetery which faces the same situation and is restricting who can be buried there as well. Fruit Heights really has a significant problem. The only way they can go is east, up the mountain on land that is currently owned by the Forest Service, but is within the boundaries of Fruit Heights itself. So on this map, the brown barren area without trees is what's owned by the Forest Service. Totally surrounding the Forest Service land are houses and only residential roads can get up to this particular area. Running through the middle, blasted in there, is a canal which will be preserved for canal use and be dedicated to that. Above it, the area that is above that, still within the city of Fruit Heights, is too steep for any development. So by city ordinance, they have already said when they receive this land, that will be permanent open space. The area below the canal here is the land in question that would be transferred to the city for the purpose of a cemetery, which they drastically need. They have been through every area they have as potential in Fruit Heights City. This is truly the only area. It is true that a Nature Conservancy group purchased this land from a citizen in Fruit Heights and then sold it at a profit to the federal government to be used as habitat for mule deer. Mule Deer Association is neutral on this bill, neither opposing it nor in favor of it, and they basically privately say if it's a cemetery, they'll probably have more forage potential for the mule deer in it than they have right now. This is what is necessary. I appreciate the minorities working with me on this particular issue to find the realization that there is a need for a cemetery. I thank them for their support. I thank the Chairman for putting this crucial issue forward, which to us maybe not crucial, but to those dying to get into this place, it is indeed crucial. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I advise my friend from Arizona I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to yield back if he is.
Yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields.
I yield back the balance of my time and urge adoption of the resolution.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 993? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1157.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 69, H.R. 1157, a bill to ensure public access to the summit of Rattlesnake Mountain in the Hanford Reach National Monument for educational, recreational, historical, scientific, cultural, and other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend remarks and include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 1157 directs the Department of Interior to provide the public with motorized, non-motorized, and pedestrian access to the summit of Rattlesnake Mountain, located in my district on the Hanford Reach National Monument. This 195,000-acre monument, designated by President Clinton in 2000, is near the Hanford nuclear site and is the only one in the continental United States managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. At 3,600 feet, Rattlesnake Mountain is the highest point in the region, and it provides unparalleled views for miles around the monument, the Hanford site, the Snake River, the Columbia River, and of course the Yakima River. Unfortunately, it took the Fish and Wildlife Service 8 years to write a management plan that effectively closed Rattlesnake Mountain to public access, despite the public comments favoring just the opposite. After I first introduced this bill in 2010, the Fish and Wildlife Service offered 2 public tours for selected individuals, and then suddenly reneged on the offer just days before the tours were to occur. During a 2011 committee hearing on the bill, the Interior Department's testimony suggested that the Fish and Wildlife Service supports tours of rattlesnake, but very carefully didn't go the extra step of ensuring the service would allow public access to the summit. Finally, last month, the Fish and Wildlife Service granted a few dozen people the opportunity to tour Rattlesnake Mountain Summit over 2 tours. These were the first 2 public tours offered since the monument was designated. Mr. Speaker, this bill is necessary to ensure reasonable and regular public access can be guaranteed by law to the citizens in that area. The legislation is sponsored by the Tri-Cities Development Council, TRIDEC, the Board of County Commissioners, Benton County Commissioners, in which Rattlesnake Mountain is located, the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Tri-Cities Visitor and Convention Bureau, and the Backcountry Horsemen of Washington. The American people deserve to have access to public lands, including Rattlesnake Mountain in my district. And I ask that the House pass this reasonable legislation today to make that possible. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1157, which would require the Fish and Wildlife Service to provide both motorized and non-motorized access to the summit of Rattlesnake Mountain. The bill would allow Fish and Wildlife Service to enter into cooperative agreements with the Department of Energy, the State of Washington, local governments, and other interested persons to provide guided tours to the summit of the mountain and to maintain the access road to the mountain. In 2008, Fish and Wildlife Service completed its management plan for this area and determined that service-sponsored or led tours and a hiking trail are appropriate and compatible uses for the area. In October of 2011, at the hearing on H.R. 2719, the Fish and Wildlife Service supported the bill's intent to provide appropriate public access on Rattlesnake Mountain that gives due consideration to all stakeholders, including the Yakama tribe. I commend Chairman Hastings for introducing the bill and support it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I only have myself to close, so if my friend from Arizona is prepared to yield back, I'll yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman, yield back the balance of our time.
Very, very good. Good question. The gentleman from Arizona yields back. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me explain a little bit about Rattlesnake Mountain and where it's located. I mentioned it is on the Hanford nuclear site, and the Hanford nuclear site was part of the Manhattan Project, in which we built and assembled weapons that won the Second World War. And then for 40 years after the Second World War, this was in a defense production where we were producing our atomic fuel for our atomic weapons. Now, Rattlesnake Mountain, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is 3,600 feet. For obvious reasons, it was closed off to access because you had a top secret or a secret site there producing weapons of war, and you didn't want people to have access to look down the Hanford site. That's totally understandable. And for that reason, nobody really objected to having the top of Rattlesnake open. However, now that Hanford is no longer in defense production, and it hasn't been for nearly 25 years, it's now in a cleanup mode, things have really changed. And when I typically have town hall meetings or meetings with people in the Tri-City area, I ask how many people have been on top of Rattlesnake, and it's surprising how few have been up there. But when you're on top of Rattlesnake, and it's 3,600 feet like I mentioned, there's no trees, so you can see 360 degrees around you. On a clear day, which we generally have in central Washington, you really can see the Columbia River coming in from the north. You can see where the Snake River, and by the way, that's where Lewis and Clark encamped before they made their trip down to the ocean. You can see where the Snake River comes into the Columbia River, and you can see where the Yakima River comes also into the Columbia River. So it is a really wonderful site, and I think it deserves to have access to the people. More and more people have had the opportunity in the past to go up there. This simply ensures that the Department of Energy will come up with a plan in which that area will readily be accessed. So I urge adoption of it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Yields? The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1157? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested, and those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1158.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 44, H.R. 1158, a bill to direct the Secretary of the Interior to continue stocking fish in certain lakes in the North Cascades National Park, Ross Lake National Recreation Area, and Lake Chelan National Recreation Area.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalba, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1158, the North Cascades National Park Service Complex Fish Stocking Act, has enjoyed broad bipartisan support, passing the last Congress by a voice vote. It was also reported out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee during the previous Congress on a voice vote with a recommendation that it pass. H.R. 1158 is necessary to ensure that the National Park Service, in coordination with the State of Washington, has the authority to continue stocking fish in certain alpine lakes in the North Cascades National Parks, including the North Cascades National Park, Ross Lake National Recreation Area, and the Lake Chelan National Recreation Area. In 2008, the National Park Service prepared an environmental impact statement regarding the management of the fisheries in these mountain lakes. That document identified the preferred alternatives as the one to allow continued fish stocking in 42 lakes in that area, where the agency concluded there would be no adverse impact on the native ecosystems. The Park Service is also requested explicit authority to allow fish stocking to continue within the park complex. And that, of course, is exactly what H.R. 1158 does. Many tourists visit the park complex for its scenic beauty as well as for its fishing opportunities, making fish stocking an important component of the central Washington economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me deviate a bit here. While we are discussing public lands legislation, I would also like to inform the House that the Committee on Natural Resources will soon begin consideration of several proposals to designate new wilderness areas. As Public Lands and Environmental Regulations Subcommittee Chairman Mr. Bishop of Utah stated last week, in July the subcommittee plans to hold a legislative hearing on wilderness proposals. Congressman Dan Benishek's Sleeping Bear Dunes legislation and Congressman Dave Reichert's Alpine Lakes legislation will be considered at this hearing. These and other proposals will be judged on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Speaker, Congress has the sole authority to decide which of our lands should be included in the wilderness system. Establishing wilderness is the most restrictive land use designation that Congress can apply to our nation's lands. It greatly limits American public's access. The committee will therefore carefully and thoughtfully examine wilderness proposals to determine if the designation is appropriate and listen to local citizens and community leaders whose livelihoods and recreational opportunities could be affected. The committee will also consider proposals to ensure multiple uses of our public lands so that they provide a full range of recreational, economic, conservation, and resource benefits. Any land use decisions by Congress should be made carefully. It should reflect our country's current economic situation, it should keep our lands healthy, and it should exemplify the importance of ensuring public access to public lands, and that's why we're going to have a very thoughtful process on wilderness designation. Now, back to H.R. 1158, since this is bordered a wilderness area, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, as a general matter, the introduction of non-native species into wilderness areas within a national park should be prohibited. In this instance, however, the National Park Service has found that fish stocking can continue within the Mather Wilderness without harm to other national park resources. Importantly, the legislation contains significant protections for those resources. We worked closely with Chairman Hastings for the past two Congresses to secure House passage of this legislation and are pleased to do so again today. The Chairman is to be commended for his efforts on behalf of the North Cascades National Park Complex. We support the legislation and reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I have no request for time, and I am prepared to yield back if the gentleman from Arizona yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just for edification of Chairman Hastings, I have 11 wilderness legislation points that I've submitted, and hopefully on a case-by-case basis, you'll get a look at some of them. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields.
I yield myself as much time, and I'll just respond to my, as I consume, I just respond to my friend. I know he has 11. He knows my general feeling on that, but I do believe that wilderness designation should be taken on a case-by-case basis, and we'll go through that due process. And with any luck, you may be on that list. And with that, I yield back my time and urge adoption of H.R. 1158.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1158? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 723 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 49, H.R. 723, a bill to amend the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to designate a segment of the Beaver, Chappuxet, Queen, Wood, and Pawcatuck rivers in the states of Connecticut and Rhode Island for study for potential addition to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 723 would authorize the study of 86 miles of rivers in the states of Connecticut and Rhode Island for potential additional National Wild and Scenic River System listing. The Natural Resources Committee amended the legislation to specifically require that the study consider any potential limitations on existing uses and any impacts to private property that could occur in an eventual designation. These are important protections and are necessary for this study bill to move forward. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We support the legislation and like to yield as much time as he may consume to the author and sponsor of the legislation, Mr. Langevin from Rhode Island. The gentleman from Rhode Island, as much time as he may consume. Thank you.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and let me thank Congressman Grijalva, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for yielding and for his outstanding work on in support of this legislation. Let me also thank Chairman Hastings, as well as the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Bishop, and your hardworking staff for working to bring this bill through the committee and to the floor today. I'd also like to thank my good friend Congressman Courtney from Connecticut, who has been an outstanding partner in this effort as well, and of course our state partners, including the Wood-Pawcatuck Watershed Association, the Save the Bay, the Nature Conservancy, the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, and the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. Their collaboration really has been instrumental in bringing this legislation to fruition. As a nation, we are, of course, privileged to have access to diverse systems of wilderness areas from remote expanses of our country to backyard wildernesses closer to home. The Wood-Pawcatuck watershed is such a place. Its rivers are within 45-minute drive of every Rhode Islander, easily accessible for family outings and school field trips. Passage of the Wood-Pawcatuck Watershed Protection Act will allow for a study of segments of the Beaver, Chepuxet, Queen, Wood, and Pawcatuck rivers in Rhode Island and Connecticut for potential addition to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System. Rhode Island and Connecticut have long been outstanding stewards of these rivers, and I hope passage and completion of this study will affirm what we Rhode Islanders already know, that the Pawcatuck and its tributaries possess outstanding recreational, natural, and historical qualities that make them worthy of designation of wild and scenic rivers. The people of Rhode Island and Connecticut have long enjoyed recreational and scenic wealth of the Wood-Pawcatuck, and we are certainly eager to share this natural treasure with the rest of New England and the nation. The Wood-Pawcatuck watershed offers exceptional trout fishing, canoeing, photography, and bird watching opportunities with adjacent hiking and camping for our sportsmen. Now, these rivers are not only an important part of our national heritage, they're also a critical part of our tourism industry and the economy. So accordingly, this study will fully engage with local government, landowners, businesses to recognize the existing commercial and recreational qualities on or adjacent to the watershed. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act offers the best guarantee that the Wood-Pawcatuck will be here for future generations to enjoy, and passage of this study is an important first step along that path. The rivers of the Wood-Pawcatuck watershed contain outstanding recreational, scenic, and natural heritage qualities that would be an excellent addition to the National Wild and Scenic Rivers System, and I urge my colleagues to support the passage of this bill. Again, I want to thank all those involved in helping to bring this bill to the floor, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona yields. The gentleman from Washington.
I yield back and urge adoption of the bill.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 723 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until 6:30 p.m. today.